Hello and welcome to the Metroidvania podcast. My name is Professor Q.
And this is Cauldrath from the Metroidvania subreddit and Discord.
I am Master. I'm also from there.
And that voice you hear in the background is actually coming from the footage that I'm showing this week. This is Within a Deep Forest. Has anybody else played this game besides me, who's on the stream, I mean?
I have not.
It's a free-to-play game. It's made by Niflas. I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, but you know who that is, right? He's the guy who made Nit.
Oh, I did not know that.
Nit Underground. Nit Underground, Nit... Well, he has a bunch of other Nit games, but...
Yeah, I played the regular Nit, but not Underground yet.
Anyway, this one was put out in like 2006, so it's sort of like his version of an Untitled story.
Exactly at the moment, nobody knows. But rumor has it that the bomb is activated. The world lies in grave danger. That is.
So, anyway, it's really neat. So we'll see some footage coming up here really soon. You play as a bouncing ball. If you played Nit Underground, you may be familiar with that. Because he did a little bit of that in Nit Underground. I don't know if that's a spoiler or not. It probably isn't.
I like playing as simple shapes.
Yeah. So this is from my playthrough. I actually recorded this while I was sitting in an airport because that's my life right now is lots of travel. But anyway, this is just what we have in the background here. It's kind of I would say it's a tricky platformer game, but you'll see the footage as it comes. So, Cauldrath, do you want to reintroduce what we were talking about this week, as we've been talking about for like the last 3 podcasts?
I'm planning out a video discussing the definition of a Metroidvania. Not really so much trying to establish one, but like going over various ones that I've seen, and then like weighing the pros and cons of different like pieces of definitions that I've seen. So like the very last thing that we discussed was whether you should require bosses for a game to be a Metroidvania.
How far did we get when we were talking about that? I don't know if we actually really...
we kind of like introduced the subject and then got off track. So we might want to just go back and continue discussing that one.
So when Axiom Verge came out, a lot of the other media outlets for games was like, oh, it balks some of the Metroidvania traditions, like bosses. And I read that, I was like, I don't know if that's part of the definition. But apparently a lot of people associate that with the definition.
Yeah. It's
something I find really interesting. I mean, like the original Metroid, you had to kill Kraid and Ridley, and in Super Metroid, you had to kill the 4 bosses or whatever. And then they had like 4 more bosses on top of that, 5 more bosses, I think. So I don't know. Yeah. What does everybody think?
Yeah. So it is one thing that technically both Super Metroid and Castlevania is something I have that not all games that came out at the same time as them had. So looking at it as like something that the games share that's also unique to them, it's kind of sort of applicable.
I mean, is it not something that a large majority of action platformers have?
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem. Is we were talking about how bosses are just kind of like the climax of a game. It's a very easy way to create a climax.
Right. If you have an action game, you usually have bosses.
You need to have some kind of climax, and that is the video game shorthand for climax. I can't think of any early examples of what you might call as a Metroidvania game that doesn't have bosses, but I think that has more to do with how easy it is to create that tension by having a boss.
Well, I think the big game that like diverges from that is Ori uses chase sequences instead of bosses most of the time.
Yeah, that was like in 2015, though. I'm trying to think of anything like early when the definition of Metroidvania was kind of developing that didn't have bosses. This would be one. This is 2006, and there are no bosses in this game. But it also, you might argue that this is not a Metroidvania. I was obsessed with this little teleporter. It kills me like 3 times before I'm finally like, okay, fine. Apparently, I don't have what I need to get through here. So talking about this game structurally, since it is a bossless game, so if I'm going to use it as an example, I have to qualify what it is. This hub world you need power-ups. Like, for instance, there you saw that little log that you needed to break with a ball you get later, and you unlock like 10 different ball types, and they let you get to access to other levels. But the levels themselves function more like Mario 64. So you might say this game is a crest-like. But anyway, but it is fully tricky platforming. I think an Untitled story could have gotten away with not having bosses, but it had bosses. So anyway, I obviously don't think that bosses are required, and I'm actually interested in seeing interpretations that don't have it. There's a game called Innumerum, I think. Let me make sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. I think it's in our in my Discord, the Metroidvania review Discord in the upcoming game section, real quick. Let's see. Emurum, where it's no combat, and the object of the game is you have basically a flashlight that can shine through walls like a scanner. And that's going to be his big shtick, is exploration. So I'm interested in seeing how that turns out.
Yeah, I guess even beyond bosses, like, okay, some people think that a game has to have bosses to be a Metroidvania, and there's probably even more people out there that think that a Metroidvania has to have combat.
Even if it doesn't have bosses? Can you have you have a game with combat that doesn't have bosses?
Like Ori.
Yeah. It's kind of... Ori is the go-to example, I think, when people think of a game that doesn't really use bosses heavily.
I would consider this to be a game with combat, even if you can't attack yourself, the enemies can attack you.
In this game?
Yeah.
Here's the thing, though, is it's not really, like... You saw that snake spitting fire, but that's like a really rare instance. In most cases, it's usually something that's more like a trap, like that fire that just came out.
Oh, yeah.
What are traps but stationary enemies?
Yeah, I mean, you can make that argument. In fact, in a lot of games, when they count traps as enemies because it's easier to have them have the same... I love this dragon. It's just hilarious to me. I think this is one of the funniest ways to create an invisible wall. And there's no explanation for it. He's just there. He just eats you if you get too far. This guy cracks me up too. He pops you if you get too close.
You just played too much Nidhogg and you're trying to win.
I guess that's true. Anyway, just unlock the first ball, and this ball jumps higher, so now I can access more of the game's world. And of course I jump straight into the water.
Why not? You're at a save point.
But anyway, I don't know your thoughts about bosses. I don't know. I think that personally I don't think so, but I could see people arguing it.
I have no more thought.
All right, so we basically don't have a verdict, but
all right, now for the topic that's going to last the rest of the 90 minutes. Discuss requiring a map.
Oh.
You knew it was going to happen sometime.
I think this is appropriate to do this now.
Does this game have a map?
It does not, actually. So you could argue that's another reason it's not a Metroidvania.
Damn. Cancelled.
Okay, so we got in a long argument about this, and like the thing that the one person was arguing about was that they thought that maps were part of the Metroidvania identity, and therefore it should be part of the definition. And my counterpoint was the original Metroid does not have a map. Most people would argue it's a Metroidvania, therefore Metroidvanias do not require maps to be Metroidvania. Otherwise, it would not be a Metroidvania if you're using that as your definition. And I think that the biggest problem with this argument or this discussion is trying to separate out defining a thing and defining what makes a thing good.
Yeah.
Maps are quality of life. You find them in a lot of games, not just Metroidvanias.
Right.
If you have any game that requires exploration, maps tend to come with that.
Yes.
You could say maps are symptomatic of a Metroidvania, but certainly they aren't part of the definition, in my opinion.
One of my biggest arguments against including it in the definition is I really think it's important that if you're going to define a genre in a certain way, you shouldn't add anything to your definition that restricts creativity. And if you can come up with a way to have the same level of quality of life, or without it being, just crap, and not having a map, then great. That's wonderful. I encourage people to show that level of creativity. I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah.
That actually kind of gets into the next one on the list. But we should probably stick on this one for a little more. I guess the next one is whether or not Metroidvanias have to be 2D. And that's also something that restricts creativity.
Yeah. One of the most upsetting things to me about the history of Metroidvanias is that Metroid Prime did not start any trends. Like, no other AAA company really took the idea of a Metroidvania and used it. And the thing that I guess at the time, what were the other first-person shooter platformers like? They're usually level-based, like mission-based, sort of like Doom.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it could have been too expensive to create Metroidvanias at that point. And then I think... Oh, go ahead.
Well, when you look at sales, I think the question is, why make a Metroidvania when you can make a Zelda-like?
Sure, and I'm okay with that too, except that there's not really a lot of Zelda-likes either. Like, Darksiders is really the only major example I can think of. There were quite a few adventure games, like Beyond Good and Evil and stuff, that came out on the PS2 era, but that kind of died out after the PS2 era had finished.
Well, that was the same era as GameCube, so the same era as
Metroid Prime, yeah.
Metroid Prime.
So Metroid Prime, if it was going to start a trend, it would have gone into the 7th generation, which is when you had things like Resistance and Halo 3 and all of those games coming out. And they still didn't really look at Metroid Prime and think that's what we need. And part of that probably could be the sales. Like they're looking at the sales numbers of Metroid Prime. And
yeah,
it didn't match up to Call of Duty or Halo. It could be the reason.
Yeah, putting together a good Metroidvania world is a lot of work.
Right.
And if it doesn't pay off sales-wise, then companies aren't going to do it.
The real reason is probably because Nintendo systematically eliminates competitors.
Have they really been doing that? That's kind of EA's thing. I haven't really noticed that Nintendo eliminates competitors.
I mean, they could be assassinating game developers when they try to make a Metroid Prime-like. I don't know. Explain why there aren't any.
Now, I am pleased to note that in the last 2 years, there have been at least 2 AAA-ish projects that have had Metroidvania-like qualities. I think that has more to do with the success of Hollow Knight, though.
Which game?
There was Jedi Fallen Order, which they believed was a Metroidvania when they were making it, and then there was Control, which they also made comparisons to Metroidvania design when they were making it. You could argue that they didn't succeed, but it was on the developers' minds when they were creating them.
Does the intent matter more than the finished product?
No, Dead Cells.
Like, counter argument, Dead Cells.
QED.
But it does please me that that's happened, and Jedi Fallen Order was really successful, and Control was being used as a flagship game for the Steam Deck. So there's good hope there that the trend has finally started. Just Nintendo didn't start it. So we'll see.
Has there been a similar lack of exploration-focused games outside of like open world exploration, which I would call pretty different from?
So I was about to kind of go into like when I was commiserating about the fact that we just haven't had Prime likes that to spawn from Prime. is that I think that when we finally got the technology to more easily create more exploration-focused experiences, we sort of skipped right to open world instead of, doing Metroidvania first. And I feel like maybe it's gone the other way now, that maybe it will be easier and less expensive for them to make a Metroidvania instead of an open world, and maybe that will drive, and the fact that they've become more popular may drive developers to create more 3D Metroidvanias.
Not sure about expenses, but I would agree with what you have said.
There's also been a lot more indie 3D attempts at Metroidvanias.
Yeah, we saw Vomitorium and Paradox Vector this last year, and a lot more that are claiming that they're 3D Metroidvanias. And then, of course, Superland claims that it's a Metroidvania.
Yeah, there was that other one. Started with recompile.
Oh yeah. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to look at that one.
Yeah.
There's been a bit of an explosion of retro first-person shooters in the last couple years, so it might also add to increased 3D Metroidvanias in the future.
It is really interesting to me. I kind of wonder what's driving that.
I'd probably say that games like Dusk coming out, popular retro shooter, and then 3D Realms, a publisher, starting to make shooters again. I'd say those are two of the reasons why it's more popular now.
Yeah, maybe the success of like Doom Eternal and stuff like that also kind of brought the that franchise back into the forefront of people's minds.
That also, and the success of Doom 2016, even more so, probably.
Anyway, I think the future is bright for these concepts, but going back to the question of does a Metroidvania have to be 2D? I don't know. I don't see any argument for why it can't. I don't think anybody's going to be confused if you call a game a Metroidvania and you look at it and it's a 3D game. They're not going to buy it and suddenly be like, no, it's not. This isn't a Metroidvania. It's not 2D, unless they heard only the title and they went and bought it.
Yeah.
And you never know with some people.
Yeah. And we got the green ball, which is basically just an upgrade to the pink ball.
That's nice.
Which is basically just an upgrade to the blue ball.
Which is just a. They get more interesting later on, I promise. The funny thing about this green ball is this guy gives you no. I'm staring at his explanation, trying to understand it, and you just have to use it.
To decode it. It's part of the puzzle. Lamula.
Now, as far as I could tell, this ball is just an upgrade to the pink ball.
Maybe that you have to press left and right at the same time, and that does something special.
Yeah, if that was the case, I never figured that out. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Maybe bouncing more can be bad depending on the situation. You don't want to do that. So
Yeah.
you switch to a lower form of ball.
Not for this ball. So you notice that I switched to the blue ball a couple of times because sometimes it's just easier when you're hopping lower because you're not bouncing against the ceiling as often. So there is a reason to use basically every ball that you acquire. These first three balls, though, are basically just higher and higher bouncing. I say three balls.
You don't want to bounce high.
What's that?
In that room, you really don't want to bounce high. The
Yes.
ceiling kills you.
Yeah, that's why I switched to the blue ball a few times there. And I think I was thinking about things. Let's see, we'll jump ahead a little bit.
Yeah, I think the reason people will argue about 3D games not being Metroidvanias is that they perceive 3D games as having too different of design for them to possibly be Metroidvanias. And while they do, 3D games usually have, much different design than a 2D game would. It's still possible to, make a Metroidvania that is 3D.
Yeah, one thing that I've noticed about a lot of 3D games is that they tend to have a lot of flat ground. You'll be outside and you just wander around on the surface. So you wind up not really, you don't have that verticality that you have in a 2D game.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, like the Superland developer was like asking on the subreddit about like things that you'd want to adjust for the sequel, and I mentioned that the game didn't feel very vertical, and they said that it like doesn't really work in 3D.
I mean, you can try.
Verticality is still important in 3D, and Superland has some decent parts with verticality. But I think Dark Souls is a great example. The original Dark Souls is a great example of how you can pull off verticality in a 3D environment.
Yeah, even without really being able to jump.
Yes. Maybe perhaps not having a jump is the reason why it pulls it off so well. Which I guess is another question. Can you have a Metroidvania without jumping?
Well, that's actually the very next thing.
Well, I didn't even realize that was...
Discuss requiring being a platformer.
So, I guess let's talk about defining a platformer, because I don't look at Symphony of the Night and Super Metroid and think, this is a tricky platformer. This game is all about the platforming, especially not Castlevania. Super Metroid, you can...
Super Metroid has platforming.
Super Metroid has more platforming, but...
Even if you don't count all the insane like wall jumps and other movement tech that you can do...
Sure. Sometimes you have to jump up. You still have
a lot of jumping between platforms.
You jump up onto a platform, but does that make it a platformer? And could you make the same argument that because you can jump in World of Warcraft, that it is now a platformer?
Is Mega Man a platformer?
So yeah, I think Mega Man would be a platformer, because Mega Man very much has tricky platforming as one of its main. And I'm not arguing that Castlevania and Symphony of the Night aren't platformers, but I am arguing that that's not necessarily part of their identity, in the sense that platforming is the identity of Celeste, and I would say that Mega Man has platforming as part of its identity. I put forth the Yoku blocks as my evidence of that. That is a key part of the challenge. Sometimes platforming is a key part of the challenge in Metroid, especially the first Metroid. But Symphony of the Night, I don't think there's ever a point where your jumping ability is ever really tested. It's usually just combat.
Does Symphony of the Night even have platforms? Like, it's pretty much just flat walking, and then sometimes you jump up to, like... I mean, there's a platform, but it's just a platform in front of a door. When are you actually jumping between platformers in Castlevania?
So
platform.
Clock tower?
Yeah, I was about to say the clock tower is the closest thing I can example I can think of when platforming actually matters in Castlevania, and even then, it's very light.
That's true. Well, I don't know. I remember actually, right, platforming and the clock tower is a pain, because it's like the only place where they have platforming.
Yeah,
it's the platformer level.
It really is.
I think Curse of the Moon had a bit more platforming, because it kind of had like gauntlets of certain biomes. But
I guess the argument I'm trying to make here is that yes, there's platforming in those key definition games, as I like to refer to them as, but it isn't a stretch to just remove the platforming and have a similar type of game.
So there's actually example, like you've played like Hero Core, Aquaria, those types of games where you just like you're effectively flying the entire time, even though you're underwater.
Oh yeah,
or whatever.
I was going to say that.
So
if you don't, like movement in the large majority of games is bounded by gravity, so that kind of. In order to have a game that's not just moving left or right, you have to have jumping of some kind of platforming, even if that's not part of the game's identity. But if you have a game that is set underwater or in space, that is not platforming, and yet it is still a Metroidvania.
There was also Unworthy, which doesn't have jumping. Now, Unworthy has a lot of platforming, but
And like there's Bionic Commando, which doesn't have jumping, but you have the grappling hook.
Yeah, there's a certain level of platforming there.
I think when people argue that the game has to be a platformer, it's because they're arguing that the game needs to have some sort of movement challenge that the player unlock new avenues of going through the game with abilities.
Yeah, one thing that I've noticed is that when there's like abilities that are based around gravity, it's a lot easier to have it so that you can't really immediately tell that like what ability is going to get you through that. When it like usually when if it's not gravity based, it's just like there's a block and you have to break the block.
Yeah, I was about to say that using hero core as an example might be problematic if you have to have ability gating, because most of hero core's, in fact, I would argue that all of hero core's gating is key gating rather than actual ability gates.
Yeah, like weapons kind of fall in this weird in-between spot. Where it's kind of like when you get a weapon that breaks blocks, then it's kind of like you get both the weapon and the key to the block at the same time. Like there's effectively not really a difference.
Right.
It's true that you can basically separate the key and the weapon, two different things, and it's the same thing.
Yes. It's not the same as like a double jump though, which has more functions besides breaking things.
That's something you could say that's something that people misinterpret about Metroidvanias, maybe. I mean, Metroid has a lot of like, oh, the door is green, so you need the green thing to shoot it. So maybe people look at that and they misinterpret what an ability gate can be.
Sure. Yeah, if you accept that as if the game has that, it's still a Metroidvania, then Dark Souls becomes a Metroidvania. Which, I don't know, some people argue that.
Yeah, there is a recent game that came out that we probably shouldn't discuss too in depth right now. That is a great example of
having too many colored doors.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to say that nothing in regards to this game that you're referring to, but Super Metroid did have the three different colors. So,
yeah, but now this one has a lot more colors.
If you were to
evolve, almost all colors.
If you were to evolve Super Metroid, that is a trap that you could fall into. To be quite honest, I don't really understand. So I was playing Metroid 2 and on stream, and I was using that footage for the analysis I did a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things I said was, I don't know why they have missile doors, because you start with missiles. So there's no reason to have the missile doors other than to waste your missiles.
Understand.
And
Variety.
What's that?
Variety.
Yeah, but anyway, I think
don't they usually indicate that there's like a save room or something of interest?
No, it usually indicates a Chozo rune, and you could actually say that's part of the environmental storytelling that they all had the missile doors. So you could make that argument.
Did Chozo just like naturally have missiles, and so that's how they get around?
Well, they probably lock down their doors. They lock their doors at night because of the pesky Metroids.
It's very clear that they do have that there is at least a faction of them that has a interest in weaponry, because in on SR388 you have that tower of weapons that has like the plasma beam and the spacer and all that stuff like that. It almost like you could almost interpret that, even though you're in the 8-bit graphics, you can almost interpret that as the Chozo like weapon facility or weapons manufacturing facility, So clearly they have that's part of their culture.
I mean, if you're naturally born with missiles, that would probably become part of your culture.
Yeah, maybe.
This is my headcanon now. Chozo are born with missile capabilities.
We're just born with missile capabilities. Maybe it's something they get as a coming of age. Like
Just laughing about Chozo gun culture. I want to know more.
More about Chozo gun culture. And you can make all kinds of fan theories about it. And there's lots of fodder information for it. So
that's the other beauty of environmental storytelling, is that you can interpret it however you want.
So I've been watching gaming videos, like when I'm ironing my shirts or whatever, and one of the guys I got addicted to recently, I can't remember his name, but he makes Fallout lore videos. I'm going to look it up real quick just so I could plug his channel. Anyway, his name is Synonymous. Anyway, they're pretty good. It's just him just rattling off lore, and there's some interesting stuff on that. But then I was looking at Fallout mods because you watch videos about a game, it makes you tempted to give it a shot again. And I went on Fallout New Vegas mods, and this guy went on for literally 15 minutes about a mod that makes it so the animation when you reload your guns are different. Like, it upgrades all of the animations for reloading your guns. He went on for like 5 or 10 minutes on this. And I'm like, why?
Some people really like their gun reloads. Like, I think it was called Black, was like a game that was basically just gun porn. And like it was all about like it had these crazy, or like people, like the reviews were talking about how good the reload animations were.
I think that's funny. It's very interesting to me. Like when I was looking to find like lighting mods and things like that. And honestly, I probably would put the reloading mod in there because he is right. There is a certain level of immersion there that every gun doesn't have the same animation for the reload. But that, to me, that's like a 1 minute thing. Like this will upgrade the animations. I'm like, oh, that's cool. But he was like showing off every single gun, and like you say, gun porn. I guess it's just a type of porn I don't understand.
It's informative.
If it exists, there is porn of it.
I guess so. Yeah. Not even the food was safe.
It does make sense, though. With New Vegas, at least, there's a perceived lack of polish in much of the game.
Oh, sure.
That, people will immediately say, like, oh, if you play it, you need to install 20 mods.
Right. I personally wouldn't need that, but his point is that you replay the game enough, then it's nice to change things up. But that's the last thing I would have on my list of things I would want to make look different. Getting rid of
sense.
Go ahead.
It'd make more sense to see that in a more game like Stalker that's more focused on the items
sure
that you find and stuff.
Guns are definitely an important part of New Vegas. But the first thing on my mind would be getting rid of everybody's butterface from the Oblivion engine that this game is running off of.
Yeah.
But that's just me. It was a culture that I was not familiar with that I got to learn about. So this is kind of a puzzle room. You're trying to get this bug to come all the way down this tower, and you have to kind of lead it. And if you touch the bug, you die. So probably the only like major puzzle thing this game has. I mean, it has a few others, I guess.
Yeah, it seems like a Batbarian style puzzle.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, actually, I think there's. What's that?
Watching the gameplay of you solving the puzzle, and then just like it just doesn't work.
Oh yeah.
You gotta restart the whole thing. It's driving me nuts.
So this is one of those puzzles where figuring it out is really easy, but executing it is actually really challenging. The hardest part about this game is there isn't any other game where you're playing as a bouncing ball. So I brought no skills into this. So having to race that spider from the top to the bottom really was actually a challenge. One of the things I like about playing games like this is it kind of makes you feel like a kid again, like what it's like to be a kid who doesn't know how the controls work on a game. There's a certain charm to that. Yep, Net Underground has the sections where you play as a ball. I only used that when I needed to get up to higher places because I hated playing as a ball in that game. I liked it in this game, though. Being based around it, there was a lot more puzzles and stuff that were interesting that way. You're going to say something, Cauldrath?
Oh, yeah, there was a game called Warriorb.
Oh, yeah.
That had, like, bouncing mechanics. Like, you switch between being a ball and up, like, having legs. And then when you were at a ball, you would bounce.
That was another game that I unfortunately never really got around to doing. Not because I didn't want to, but because, there's just so many games you could play.
Yeah.
I remember there being a lot of Flash games that had interesting movement mechanics back in the day.
Oh yeah, Armored Games was just good times back in the day. I love seeing stuff like this, and like even now with the indie scene, it feels like the creativity is waning again because now the indies still have to compete with so many things. There's still those passion projects that come out, but
how often do you see just like a simple platformer come out?
That's the thing I was about to say, is that like nobody seems to be willing to make these MS Paint games anymore.
Probably because the games they're making, they're trying to sell and they're putting a lot of effort into, as opposed to something that took someone like a month to make and is free.
Right. Yeah.
Of course, those types of games exist. I'm just not sure.
This game is just an artifact of a bygone era. It's interesting to go back and see them, and you know what? I think more people need to do projects like this.
And there are still plenty of people who make projects like that. Just you're gonna find them on like itch.io now.
Yeah, that's true. itch.io is really the best place to go for that. They usually charge for it still, though, which is fine. They deserve to be paid for it, I think, but it does mean that less people will play them. Unlike this, this was actually at AGDQ for 2015, I think. They did this game. So clearly people have a nostalgia for this, which is actually a really big accomplishment, I think. I don't think Lyle and Cube Sector has been at AGDQ, but I could be completely wrong about that.
The difference is that this is a superior game.
The Lyle and Cube Sector? Where's Phaserman when you need him? I actually thought about doing a video review for this after playing it, because it's just a cozy little game. I like it a lot.
So they have to add a minecart level. Is a minecart level thing required for a Metroidvania?
So I had actually forgotten about the minecart level because I played this over the course of a couple of weeks when I could, because I had it installed on my laptop. And so it had been like a couple weeks since the last time I had played it before I finished off. It's only about 4 hours long. Completely had forgotten about this level until I was putting the footage together for today. So this minecart level has a little bit of a twist on it. Instead of just jumping like most minecart levels, you actually have to charge your jump. And then the longer you charge, the higher you jump.
I've noticed something. I think there's a perceived distaste of mini games like this, where suddenly the mechanics are different for, a short segment of the game.
So I think it's worse in Metroidvanias because the entire point of a Metroidvania is building up a character's capabilities, and then you just throw all of them away for these type of sections.
That's true.
That's a pretty good point.
In general, though, if you think back to, I don't know, like PlayStation 2 era games, maybe, weren't there a lot of mini games? I could just be not remembering that, or I don't have view of every game that released.
It started to become really popular to do that type of thing. What was it? Sonic Adventure 2 or Sonic Adventure DX allows you to unlock, like for getting the emblems in that game, it allows you to unlock Game Gear games, like full Game Gear games. And that just doesn't happen anymore because now they can sell them digitally.
Yeah.
This is the glass ball, probably the most interesting ball in the game because it's worthless except in like very rare instances. Because if you jump too high, it breaks, or too fast if you get too fast.
That's fun. Doesn't Undertale and other related games have mini games in them?
Yeah, they do, but they're not usually required. Actually, never mind. Undertale has a few of them. One of them that really sticks out in my mind, I mean, Final Fantasy VII had a bunch of mini games. They had the snowboarding and stuff like that. Usually, there weren't any major consequences for failure, though, and I think that makes a difference. And that's true of the other game I was about to list, too. I actually went back to the tutorial level to try out the glass ball because I could not figure out. Actually, I think I came in here to see if it gave me any more information on what the green ball does for you. But anyway, Mario RPG has, I think, 12 mini games, and all of them are part of the game's progression, but I don't think any of them punish you for... Like, you can still progress through the game pretty easily, and doing well in the mini game is more about acquiring additional rewards rather than having to get through. And I think that that's where the line needs to be drawn with these mini games. Is they're fun to include, but if you're going to throw a minecart level into your game, you need to either like make it optional, or playing a game that you don't want to play suddenly is a problem.
Sure, if it's like a 30-second segment that you never have to repeat again because it's easy, you do it on the first try.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Rabby Ribby had a shooter section,
But
it wasn't particularly hard.
I was also about to say that game is practically a shooter anyway, so it's not a stretch to. You're still doing the thing that you've been doing for the entire game by doing the bullet hell thing.
See, I feel like there's get the impression that there's a perception. Yes, I'm getting around stating things that might be false. I get the impression that there's a perception that minigames are a bad thing to have in your game. But then people will praise like the Nier games for just randomly changing their style of play.
Yeah, it ultimately boils down, just don't have bad mini games in your game.
Yeah.
Belfast Belmont just brought up the Mako from Mass Effect. Mass Effect had a lot of... I hate the hacking games. It's just like, just stop. No more.
You don't want to play with pipes?
I don't want to play with pipes. Honestly, the pipes are not the worst example of a hacking minigame, but Mass Effect is a great example of that. It's just like... It's great the first few times you do it, but after a while, it's just... Alright, we're done.
You know why? I think it is a response to lazy, repetitive minigames you find in a lot of like open world games, and
It could be also, yeah.
similar. Because I mean, think of that compared to, say, for example, Nier. I haven't played too much Nier, but I played a bit of Automata, and you have like the top-down segments. Sometimes the perspective just completely changes. And it changes how you control your character. Those are distinct segments. But it's not a distinct segment when you're doing the hacking minigame for the 20th time. Just doing the same exact thing.
Yeah, the Nier Automata stuff, it's pretty close to the same gameplay anyway.
Yeah.
I think another problem is that a lot of these mini games are just like pass-fail. Like, you either succeed at them or you just like instantly lose.
Right. And
That's true.
that's what I was saying with the Mario RPG example, is that none of them... If you do poorly at the minigame, it still pushes you on to the next thing. You just don't get any rewards from the minigame.
But do they have missables in there?
Yes and no.
Like, I remember like Final Fantasy IX had some mini games where you had to succeed at them to get certain items, and there was nowhere else to get them.
Yes.
And then you couldn't come back later because the mini game was only for that part of the game.
I don't know if I remember that. But
I think it was like
nine has other missables besides that. Oh, you're talking about the triple triad analog that they had.
There was like, I forget what, there was like some foot race or something like that. I remember it was like Robe of Lords is what you got as the reward for it, and you couldn't get it anywhere else.
You're talking about the jump rope thing at the beginning of the game.
Yeah.
There were a couple of missables with that, yeah. Final Fantasy IX has a lot of missables. I don't know if it's like a whole lot, but it's enough that... And not being the game in under 8 hours or whatever it is to get the Excalibur 2.
Yeah.
So interestingly enough, I got a... So I've been playing around with some ROM hacks, and one of the ones I picked up was Final Fantasy IX Alternate Fantasy. And it's... one of the things that it does is it makes it so there's an alternative way to get the Excalibur 2, which is to... So you could get to the Excalibur 2 in less than 14 hours, or you can collect every treasure in the world, and you can miss up to 3. So you could get it through exploration, or you could get it through time speed running, and I thought that was pretty clever.
Okay.
Interesting.
The downside to that is that when you move on to another disc, some dungeons become inaccessible. So of course that makes the treasure option.
If you miss too many missables, then you miss the last missable.
Exactly. It's like the king of missables.
Yeah.
And also, there's a lot of times that you're just like, these treasures only have like potions and stuff in it anyway. Although I don't really think I've ever felt that way with Final Fantasy, because a lot of times it's like, oh, this could have the Genji Glove or the Offering in it, or something like that, you know? Anyway, I haven't really played the mod yet, but it does a bunch of other things too, like give people new spells and stuff.
Interesting. This is a bit of a tangent, but you talking about the alternate ways to get rewards reminds me of Dead Cells. Dead Cells, basically you have a couple options to grind out the currency / get rewards for the run, because there are time doors and there are perfect doors between some of the stages, where you either get there in a certain time or you kill a certain amount of enemies without taking damage. So you can do those to get extra loot, but you can also, if you're doing those, you're probably not fully clearing the map, or you're skipping some parts of it, so there's kind of a trade-off between, do I want to go quickly to get this static-ish reward, like I know about what it's going to be, or do I want to full clear the map and try to get the combo?
I actually thought that was one of the most clever things that they did in Dead Cells, personally. It allows basically... when I played it, there was only the time thing. I don't remember there being an enemy clear thing. But I like this little bear. Just little details. It's fun. But I remember the time thing versus the full clear. And if they didn't have that, then you would basically be encouraged to go slow the entire time. And they wanted the game to be faster paced. And so they allowed you to have both options, I think, from doing it that way.
Yeah, if you're playing really well, you can... Like, the times are generous enough to where... I think they also adjusted the times a bit, but they're generous enough to where if you're playing well, you can explore pretty much all of the map and also make it to the time door and also get the combo door.
So if anybody read my review on Monday, these are the gnomes I was talking about. So
they seem like jerks.
The gimmick in this room is that the walls will always mess you up, so you should just look at them as walls, but you have to kind of mentally take that away. And it's just kind of a neat little thematic thing that they threw in here that wasn't really necessary, but it was fun.
It is fun.
So the walls are walls, the floors are not floors.
Yes. Exactly. It's the opposite You need to look at it as they're not there to help you at all. But now you get to hate the gnomes instead of it just being
the devs.
This room would have been really boring if it was just those 2 blocks in the middle with the block in the solid wall in the middle, because that's basically what this room actually is. And this is another example of just a way to spice up your game by using theming without really costing you anything. I mean, I'm sure it was an effort to program that and whatever, but level design wise, it isn't any different than what I just described, but it just makes it so much different, feels so much different thanks to that theming.
Those random one-room things are what really make exploration special for a lot of games.
Yeah.
But not everyone seems to get the memo, and they're making games.
Yes.
I think that's actually like one of the big appeals of Castlevania, is they have so many like unique things.
I mean, they have a lot of different enemies. You're still gonna see the enemy at probably a few different places.
Well, there's
Just
some that
spam
are
stuff
just like
everywhere.
It's not just
There's
enemies,
some that
though. It's like environmental details. Like that's one of the reasons why I still like Aria of Sorrow and Symphony of the Night. I really think Aria of Sorrow is just a better game for gameplay, but Symphony of the Night just has so much stuff crammed into every room because the developers were just given free reign to basically do whatever they want. I switched the game over to 8 doors here just to put this on the air for a bit, just to FYI for anybody watching. I'll switch the name of the stream to update for that. But yeah, that's one of the things I like about Symphony of the Night. You got that little on the Battle of the Clock Tower. You have the telescope that does nothing other than you can just look at the terrain off in the distance. It's just I'm just imagining some programmer just taking the time because they were bored and they just thought it would enhance the game. And in my opinion, it does.
like
There's also a problem if you're adding in lots of things that you think are cool to your game that aren't necessary. That's kind of the definition of having feature creep, if they're not really features.
Well, that's the thing is they're not. When it comes to a Metroidvania, I don't think you can have too much of that. Or the room with the confessional where you sit down and the ghost of the priest shows up, and then like if you sit on the opposite side where the priest is, like a woman shows up. I think that stuff is great. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. I mean, I haven't sat down and like tried to overanalyze it to add some kind of lore significance to it, but it makes the castle seem spooky, which I think is cool.
I would agree. Add cool things to your game, but also don't succumb to super feature creep and delay your game by 5 years.
No, that's true.
Yeah, I think part of the thing there is that it's a AAA studio, so they had like a lot of developers.
Yes.
So there was probably some like downtime where somebody was like blocked by something and had to wait, and then while they're doing that, then they can work on some little thing that doesn't really matter.
Which is honestly a fantastic thing. It's like the developer equivalent of if you can lean, then you can clean. Except you're actually having fun.
What you should do if you're an indie developer then, just get some random friend to mess around with your game and like add in random stuff.
Yeah. No,
between your builds.
So I made some games back in high school, and I let my friends go in and just make NPCs. Some of them were entertaining. They're fun. Highly recommend doing that if you're a developer.
Imagine there's a person out there whose job it is to just add random stuff.
I mean, if you look at open world games, that's pretty much all they are.
Well, but that's formulaic random stuff.
So it can be done good or bad, you know. Like I feel like New Vegas and Breath of the Wild both have NPCs that actually mean something or are actually interesting and very thematic. And honestly, Fallout 3, that's like the only thing good about the game is that they did a pretty good job cramming it full of stuff that was interesting to find. If you look at the main plot and stuff, it's kind of awful, but
yeah, it is true. I don't mean to just say like, oh no, open world game bad. Right?
Sure. But I know what you're saying when you say it's formulaic.
Well, it's not always formulaic. I'm imagining like the most generic AAA open world game possible.
Yeah, a good open world game is crammed full of stuff.
Yes.
And yeah, I think that that principle applies to open world games as much as it does Metroidvania games. All right,
Wouldn't
so
you want to be the guy who just adds in random stuff, though?
Oh yeah, I would love to be that guy. If that could be my day job, that would be totally what I'd be doing. I think that would be the most fun thing to do. Of course, you know, I like doing creative things, even though I don't have to. So this is one thing about my videos is that, like, watching this Fallout guy, he just shows footage for minutes at a time of just zooming in on terrain while he reads off the lore. And that kind of effort, I'm sure, makes it really easy for him to produce those videos. I'm not saying anything bad about him or anything by saying this, but I just can't do that with mine. I always want everything I'm saying to match up to what's going on in the visuals to make it worth actually watching the video, even though I know a lot of people just listen to it.
Some people just want that sweet, sweet ASMR.
Yes. I don't know if my voice is ASMR or not, but I have no idea because I don't get that that feeling that the people who enjoy that get.
Just haven't listened to someone who has ASMR voice.
I guess not. Okay, so platformer.
So we were on discuss what a platformer is.
We only have 3 points
Or
left, and we have
other-
half an hour. We can do it, guys. We can finish this off this week. So compare Metroidvania definitions to roguelike versus roguelite definitions.
Yeah. So, if anyone's not familiar, there was the Berlin definition of roguelike, which was basically this big list of features that are like either mandatory for a roguelike, or the another list that was like kind of like you need a certain number of these to count. But it was like a very long list, so it really narrowed it down to being very much like the original Rogue. Whereas,
It's hilarious that this happened, to be honest.
sorry, what was that?
I think it's hilarious that happened. Like,
Oh yeah, that they actually got a group of people together to come up with this definition.
not only did they get a group of people together to come up with that definition, but it became like an accepted thing that everybody cites.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if we could pull that off with the definition of Metroidvania.
Yeah, like who were these people, and why do we care what their like definition was?
Right. Who would we get
Maybe-
together for the Metroidvania version of that?
Yeah, maybe you found just a lot of the community in one place. You know, like on the roguelike forum. Now there's all kinds of different forums that people are on. You know, there's probably like a Metroidvania community on 4chan that we've had zero contact with.
Oh, that's true.
They did. There was the like 4chan Metroidvania tier list that had La Mulana and like part of the Holy Trinity.
I actually kind of agree with their whole trinity, to be honest. I don't know if I put Symphony
Yeah.
of Night on there, but
Yeah.
but that's just me
Yeah.
personally, though. I could see putting it on there. I wouldn't disagree with that if they wanted to call that the definitive 3.
Yeah. Like I'm probably in agreement with you where I feel like the like Zero Mission is better than Super Metroid, and Aria is better than Symphony of the Night.
Right.
I think that if you had a person who was like, I guess, like, you know, a semi-well-known YouTuber, Twitter person or whatever to advertise something like that, and you just went to different communities and posted about it. I mean, you could post something like that on the Metroidvania subreddit, for example, and, you know, people upvote it. A fair amount of people will see that. And
So
I think you could organize a group of people who could debate about this kind of thing. I don't think anyone could actually come to an agreement, though.
What if you got like Igarashi, Team Cherry, Jeremy Parrish, and Sakamoto was the Metroid developer, I think it was.
Yeah.
What if you got all those people together and they came up with a Metroidvania definition?
Well,
there'd
I
be
don't think
publicity because of that, but I don't think those people would come up with something that's good.
So we could totally do this as a con, guys. We could pretend that we had a convention, make up a bunch of names. It doesn't matter because this is the internet, and then say that we've gotten this authoritative group together, and this is our results. We're all academics with PhDs or whatever in game design, and just pretend that we got all that together. Belmont's telling me to shut up.
What it is, we just have to meet in person, because if you're on the internet, you can always.
We don't even have to meet in person. We just have to pretend we met in person. Nobody knows this Berlin convention actually happened for the roguelite thing.
The thing is, okay, imagine that it was just the three of us, and we got together and we were like, okay, we are going to come up with a definition for a Metroidvania, and we're going to act like we're authorities and stuff like that. Would we actually be able to come up with a definition that all three of us agreed with?
That's actually a problem.
I think the three of us could agree on.
Well, that's what I'm saying, Cauldrath, is you just need to make this con all by yourself and just have all of these three people that just agree with you. And
we can definitely agree on something. We agree on almost everything.
But here's another point about that Berlin definition, is that even though everybody cites it, it also is completely meaningless. People still don't accept it.
So what we should do, we should actually, if we actually had just three people meet up in person and talk about it for a long time and come up with the definition, you can claim that's a convention. You can't claim that a Reddit post's a convention, but you can for meeting in person. And it's not, you may not even have a record of what you've said in person.
I mean, we could complain that this is in person right now. Nobody knows that we're not in person.
Well, yeah, I mean, but doing it without lying to people.
Sure. I'm just saying.
Theoretically, we could absolutely have a convention, call it a convention, and if we acted like we knew what we were talking about, then it could catch on.
I mean, obviously, I have a thing against lying too, but I'm just saying that you could very easily.
It's for the greater good.
There you go. You can make that argument. But
at that point, if we're making a definition, we're spreading it through citing a convention. Just actually have a convention.
Sure. I guess that's true. We could just do it. Just pretend we're higher authority than we have.
That's how people get authority. They just fake it till they make it.
I have a CPA. I have a CPA, and therefore I have a better opinion about what a Metroidvania is.
Nobody's gonna come along until you have authority, because there is no authority, because it's just the genre.
Sure, I know.
There is no roguelike authority either, but people apparently still had a convention.
Yes. I think that people bring up that convention more as a satire, a satirical thing than they do saying, okay, this is what they decided. But anyway, as far as roguelite and roguelike, one thing that would interesting that we could discuss about that is, should there be a Metroidvania light to try and capture a lot of these games? Would Dark Souls be Metroidvania light because it has everything about the ability gating?
So the thing is, between roguelike and roguelite, light is still a distinct set of features, but if you have a Metroidvania light, that's pretty vague. That can apply to a lot of different games.
Well, that's partly because we don't have a set definition. What would a Souls-like light be?
Let's talk about what a Souls-like is first.
Yeah. It's just, the more vague the definition is, the less agreement you have there, the less meaningful a light category is.
So if you asked me 4 years ago whether or not I thought that Souls-like should be a genre, I'd be like, yeah, sure, absolutely, we should do that. At this point, though, I'm just let's just stop it, guys. I'm done. We're not... We can't just call every hard game that exists a Souls-like just because it's difficult, guys. or any game that has lore that's fed to you through item descriptions.
See, you could have Metroidvania Lite, but that would more encompass what we call Metroidvanias now, and then Metroidvania-like would be super strict definition. I just feel like the like-light dichotomy doesn't work if the like isn't strict.
Yeah.
I don't think Metroidvania should, I don't think it needs a strict genre. Roguelike, there's some pretty specific mechanics there, and it's obvious when something isn't a roguelike.
Right. Yeah.
For the most part.
Yeah. I still need to find a true roguelike that I actually enjoy. Most of the time it has to have some kind of change to it before I find it palatable. I need to play the original Rogue is what I need to do. Like, go back to the beginning.
I'm sure it's worse.
Yeah, it could be.
And there's plenty of similar-ish games you can play.
I enjoy a lot of games that have roguelike elements. Like, I've been playing a game called Out There on my phone when I'm bored. I do need to play Adam. Everybody says Adam's the best one.
I played Adam for like 30 minutes, and I just never continued.
I just can't stand how much RNG is. Like, so there's the prog gen RNG, which I'm fine with. That's like before the game RNG, but then like if the combat itself is also RNG, so you just like go fight some random like minor enemy and then you die because you missed 5 times in a row and they crit you over and over again.
Yeah. You like it better than when you have more get good control over your success.
Yeah, I don't like failing at a game because the game just decided I get to fail now.
Right, and that can happen a lot in a lot of roguelikes / lights.
Adam seems more like a simulator, but a similar-ish game that I enjoyed more is Tales of Maj'Eyal, which is... It's more of... It's like, you could say it's streamlined. It's like, instead of the simulator stuff, you have a lot of in-depth, tactical sort of gameplay for combat.
Yeah, Maj'Eyal and Adam are the two that everybody says are the definitive roguelike games. Like, I guess there's a big argument about which one's the better one. It's the Symphony of the Night and Super Metroid are the two.
From what I've seen, they're pretty distinct in their style. I wouldn't necessarily, say one is strictly better than the other because they have different modes of play, basically.
Hey, it's like Super Metroid and Symphony of the Night. This is a perfect analogy.
Well, so I played like 30 minutes of Adam, so I don't have much of an opinion on that. It's just I noticed like, it has all these random stats like fire making. Oh, cool. Okay. Maj'Eyal doesn't have that. Maj'Eyal has like 20 different skills you put in your hotbar, though.
So, subjective definitions of Metroidvania, the I know it when I see it definitions, and Cauldrath called me out and put my definition down here. Do you want me to read that, Cauldrath, since it's technically mine?
Go for it.
Okay, now I'm going to add the disclaimer that I drafted this up just like in a conversation, and I hadn't put a ton of thought into it, and I probably would change it before I read it off. But I put down, like, if I were to, this would be my first draft of an outline if I were to try and make a video about this. And the first one is exploration discovery is a primary goal. That's the first point of the definition of Metroidvania. The second point is what you discover is meaningful and critical in some way. It's not just a number going up. And then the third one is you gain new skills that support the above two traits with a sense of progression, as well as allowing you access to content you could not previously access without them. So that would be where I would start in trying to make a definition of Metroidvania.
Yeah. So well, go ahead.
Cauldrath has put this in the subjective approach to the genre definition.
Yeah, I know that you didn't like it being subjective, but that's the best thing I could think of at the time.
Sure.
I think that maybe calling it like an emotion-based genre might be like, or like the feeling that's being evoked.
Yeah.
Kind of like, so there's different types of genres. Like this would if we go with this definition, then what would make it the same type of genre as like horror, where the point is to evoke the feeling of fear,
Right.
whereas the point of a Metroidvania could be considered to evoke a sense of exploration and discovery.
I think that is an interesting way to go about definitions.
I mean, when it comes to video games, I think that sometimes we ignore the emotional core of it in analysis because we somehow think that acknowledging the emotional aspect of our experience is somehow not objective, which is probably true. But overall, your reaction to a game is going to be subjective regardless of how objective you try to be. Objectivity comes from trying to identify the elements that create subjective reactions.
Yeah, and there's also like a connotation that should not be there of subjective being bad.
Yes, that's also another aspect too. And that when I hesitated to accept you calling it a subjective definition, I think that there are some very important concrete aspects to what I had written down there. I premised before I said anything about it that I don't think it's perfect, but it is kind of a reflection of maybe how I feel. And if I probably should have thought about it more before we started the stream, how I would change it now. But I think that those are I think the key ideas that come to my mind immediately.
So my problem with I know it how I see it definition for Metroidvanias, but also for games in general, is that you can't, it's hard to tell at a glance what something actually is. For the most part, you have to play a Metroidvania for a while to actually tell if it's a Metroidvania.
Yeah, that's definitely so. I don't think that my definition is a you know it when you see it definition. The problem with I know it when I see it is that you have to understand what a feeling is supposed to be evoked in the first place.
You also have to know what you're seeing.
Right. One famous example of that phrase, I know it when I see it, was when discussing what the definition of pornography is. And
But that was the origin.
Is it the origin? I don't know. I'm sure that people said I know it when I see it to describe things before. But anyway, that's what some judge said. And there is some truth to that. But then the question is that like if someone is aroused by looking at, I don't know, cabbages in the store or eggplants in the store, if they're aroused by eggplants, does that mean that that's now pornography? Like, that's the problem with that kind of... But his point is that most of us can kind of understand what it is when we see it. If you don't know what a Metroidvania is, you know it when you see it, and it's completely meaningless.
So
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying.
So how do you determine if a game is a horror game then?
That is hard.
Okay, here's a question. Is Resident Evil Code Veronica a horror game? Am I the only one who's played that?
I have played that.
I think it's a comedy.
Yeah.
I think it's a...
Yeah, and kind of like, okay, Castlevania is gothic horror, but you definitely wouldn't consider it horror.
It's only...
Like, there's horror theming, like, or like horror genre theming, and then there's like actual horror. And I feel like Resident Evil is like zombie horror theming, but not actually horror.
There's also
Right.
different kinds of horror.
Like, I think the only reason why you would ever call Castlevania horror is because it includes classic horror monsters.
Right.
If I'm horrified at the prospect of playing another Castlevania game, does that mean it's a horror game?
The meta around the game is horror, not the game itself.
But on that same token, the genre horror is still a useful genre to identify things with.
Yeah.
At the very least, it describes what that person feels about that particular whatever they're describing. At the same token, though, if I called, I don't know, I hesitate to call Castlevania gothic horror, just because gothic, yes, Monster Mash, yes, horror, probably not.
I think
I would consider gothic horror to not be a subgenre of horror. It's a theme.
Yeah, I guess that may be a way to describe it.
I think the thing with horror games is that even if you play a game and it's not scary at all, you can tell if it was meant to be. You can tell if a game was meant to be a horror game. Of course, you have games like Subnautica where they end up scaring lots of people, but not everyone, may think it's supposed to be one.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of games that are pretty explicitly trying to be horror games.
I'll tell you what, I screamed out loud more often when I played Dark Souls than any of the horror games I ever played growing up.
Hey, Dark Souls might actually be a horror game.
You could make that argument.
Dark Souls 3 has, actual horror elements. Not just because it's bad.
Oh gosh, there was a Calvin and Hobbes comic about that, and he's like, I have hiccups, can you scare me? And he's like, global warming is heating up the planet, and we're all going to die the horrible heat death. And he's like, that's not what I meant. Oh boy.
But yeah, the way I'm looking at this is that there's different types of genres, and it's questionable whether, you have some people who think that Metroidvania is kind of a core gameplay genre, and those are the people who think that it has to be a 2D platformer. And then some people think it's a level design genre, that's the category I'm in, where it has to be an interconnected, ability-gated world. And then your definition is kind of more is an emotional genre like horror is. It would be that category.
That makes a lot of sense. We need to define the genres of genres. That sounds really dumb. I'm not joking. We should actually do that. Because I haven't really, people usually don't talk about that, and it seems important.
No, I agree. Video game genres are really horribly defined in general.
We will have a genre revolution. Think about a standard for all genres.
It's just the goofiest thing that first-person shooter is a genre in video games. Because first-person can be anything now. Is Mirror's Edge a first-person shooter? It has first-person shooting.
Yeah, you can pick up guns and shoot people with them.
Have you guys seen that XKCD comic where there's 14 competing standards? Someone goes, no, that's ridiculous. We need to unify them under one standard. And then sometime later there are 15 competing standards.
So I keep going back to the cube roll when I talk about. I think it's the funniest thing. I brought this up before, right? Everybody knows what the cube roll is.
Yeah.
Yes.
What I think is the funniest thing about the cube roll, and if anybody who's listening who hasn't heard about the cube roll, I'm not going to go through it all over again. Just look up cuberoll.com and it'll give you the gist. The funniest thing about it is that it completely loses sight of the point of identifying things as genres in the first place and what it does for us, why it's useful at all.
But it's such a nice sounding definition because it's logical and mathematical.
Right, but it's also very pointless. It's logically pointless.
See, that's another thing with people defining things is that they'll think of something that sounds cool and hey, that makes sense for that to be defined that way, and then they'll
discover that they excluded Super Metroid from their definition.
Yeah.
Right. It's, yeah.
Also, just because something fits together nicely or you can like concisely state it in 2 sentences. It doesn't mean that it's a good definition. It doesn't mean it's accurate definition, I should say.
So my daughter has just figured out how to open her door, which she has not figured out before.
Oh.
And now she's just opening it and peeking her nose out and closing it and opening it again. Just funny. It's funny watching people figure out the most mundane tasks that we just take for granted, that none of us realize we ever had to learn, you know?
Like watching somebody play a video game that doesn't know how to play video games.
Yes. Yeah, I had to do that this morning when they were playing Smash Brothers. They basically just push the B button over and over again.
That's the best button.
It is the best button, especially if you're Pikachu, so your dad can be in the room hearing Pikachu, Pikachu over and over again. It's amusing to me.
Fire.
There's a certain level of enlightenment that comes from watching children grow up. That you realize things, or you remember things that you had forgotten, and it's kind of neat.
You need to teach your child door safety so they don't like slam their fingers out.
Yes,
of curiosity.
we had to learn that very early on. I have twins, so I do not have the advantage of each of my kids being separated by a number of years and experience.
So you get to practice on one and only ruin one of them.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's not what I meant, but I meant that with twins, they're on the same level from the beginning, and they both make the same mistakes at the same time, which can sometimes double the damage.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to like slamming doors, like if a little kid slams a door on the older brother will be the one who tells them to stop. But when they're both doing it, you know, it leads to injury.
Feedback loop.
Yes. So last point. Do you want to do the last point in the last 10 minutes?
Sure, might as well get this over with.
Point. Go ahead.
In a good way.
Point-based definitions versus hard cutoffs of specific requirements. So this is when it's like, it's kind of like the Berlin definition where it has like, so it has the one list where it has to like you have to have all of these, and then the other list where it's like you have to have X number of these. So that's like a point-based thing, where in this case all of them are worth 1 point, but you have to reach a certain number of points. So the thing I wanted to bring up is that if you have a definition like that, then you can wind up with games that are falling in the same genre that are very different from each other because they got points from different places.
So I definitely think that if you had a point-based system, it needs to be combined with a concrete system. Like it needs to have these, definitely, 100%. If it doesn't have these, it is not a Metroidvania. But then you can have, you know, your points or whatever if you wanted to do that.
What's the point of points? So are you assigning thing a fits of Metroidvania, or are you just, is this for is something is or isn't?
It's is or isn't. I guess if it was like not quite there, then it would be like close to being a Metroidvania, and then you could like use it to say like how close it is to being a Metroidvania.
Because I feel like if you're going through the effort of having a point-based system, it would be beneficial to define how Metroidvania something is. If it has like 9 points versus 8 points, but the cutoff is 6 points, you know, is there a difference between the 8 and 9 points?
Yeah, like there was, I think it was on the Metroidvania review Discord, there was a like point-based thing going around where like has a map gives you a bunch of points, has ability gating gives you a bunch of points.
That was on our Metroidvania, but yeah. That was being pushed around.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I think that there are critical elements that you need to include. Otherwise, you might end up with a situation where you have a game with a map. You know, or an open world game might end up being on the list if you're not careful, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
There should be there should be some things that if it doesn't have this, then it's definitely not a Metroidvania. Like ability gating is something I'd probably put on that. And if I do that, you can't include Dark Souls, but people don't want to anyway. So
yeah. Although the people who support the point-based systems would contend that you could just adjust the point values until the games that you don't want to be on there aren't on there anymore.
Yeah, I love the idea of trying to base your system around excluding things like Zelda and Dark Souls. When in reality, it might be more useful to talk about the similarities than it is to try and push them away, but...
Yeah. Like, there is definitely things to be... We bring it up on the podcast all the time.
Yeah, we brought up Mala Milana yet?
Like, I think, I mentioned it with the Orcan tier list.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, you can't not mention that.
I almost mentioned La Milana when talking about watching children do things for the first time.
Oh, man. Smash Brothers is the first game that they've actually been willing to play for more than 5 minutes before getting frustrated, which is really interesting to me.
Well, they're doing co-op, so...
Yeah, that's true.
Pretty simple.
Usually they lose to the computer, though, because all they're doing is spamming the B button, and that's usually not a kill move. At least not with the characters they're playing.
You should teach them.
Samus has a kill move, but you actually have to charge it up. And they don't do that. They just tap the button.
You can kill with a super missile, but they probably don't know how to do that.
Side B, yeah.
I'm sure if you just explain what a side B is, they'll get so much better at the game.
Well, Samus is weird in that she has two different side Bs. She has the tilt and the smash side B, where one is a regular missile and the other is a super missile.
So right now they have difficulty with the concept of pushing multiple things at the same time. Like when they play Kirby, they'll push the jump button and then they'll push the move to the right button, right? Or the right on the D-pad. But they don't get the idea that they need to hold both down in order to succeed. They're gradually getting there, but it's interesting, seeing children, being children.
How fast do you think you could explain to a child how to play a video game?
How fast? I don't know. It depends on how old they are.
Would you even be able to?
I think it depends on how old they are. I mean, they're only 4 right now, and I don't know what age children normally start playing video games, but...
I started playing video games when I was 5, and nobody taught me how to play.
Yeah, I'm thinking that that's probably around when I was doing it, too. When I actually became interested in doing it.
Of course, I was playing Atari, which consisted of a non-analog stick and a single button.
Great. Yeah, there's... See, I started really with the Nintendo... That's not true. I had an Apple IIe that my dad had, and he had a whole bunch of pirated software for it. And so I had a lot of games for that. I always say that Hard Hat Mac was my first game. But that's only because I have video proof that I played it when I was young, and it very well could have been anything else, but I just don't remember. But we have video or my dad bought one of those cameras that you shove a VHS tape into, and he used that to film us as kids. And he walked into the room when me and my brother were playing on the Apple IIe ones, and Hard Hat Mac is what's on the screen, so that's why I say that's my first game. In reality, it could have been any of those pirated games. We did play Hard Hat Mac a lot. I have no idea why. That game's not the greatest, but what game was back then, I guess.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Play what you got.
I played a lot of Sierra Adventure games as a kid. I had to have my parents help me because I couldn't type fast enough for some of the challenges. There's a couple of points in the first Space Quest where you have to... There's a spot where you have to throw a bomb at this thing called an Aurak so that it explodes. But you have to do it as it's coming towards you, and if you don't type fast enough, it'll eat you. And then there's another part where you ask a shopkeeper who has grenades sitting on his counter. He's a weapons dealer. If he has anything in the back, and then you steal a grenade, and that's the puzzle. But if you don't type take grenade fast enough, then he comes back and catches you. And I couldn't pull those off as a kid. Anyway, that's a tangent.
Yeah. Like execution combos.
Yeah. Let's see.
Do we want to actually discuss the point-based versus hard cutoff before we end?
Well, we've sort of discussed it before we went on the tangent, but I wanted to go into the Blasphemous example. So Blasphemous' abilities are very far on the key side of the key ability spectrum, which would likely put it past any cutoff for ability gating.
Oh, yeah. I did not read this bottom part.
But a lot of people still consider it a Metroidvania. You don't consider it a Metroidvania, right, Master or Cauldrath?
Yeah, I don't consider Blasphemous a Metroidvania.
And Master, I don't think you played it.
I'm waiting for the DLC to come out. I've been waiting for like 3 DLC. Before I can play it, they always announce another DLC, so I gotta wait.
That's kind of what happened to me.
Do they have another one?
Yeah, their final DLC.
Yeah, they've
Before
actually
making a
announced this as
sequel
the
or
final
whatever.
DLC this time.
Final for real this time, I promise.
I enjoy Blasphemous. It gives me the Metroidvania feel. Like if it takes until after you get past the Turian door. I call everything when you have to kill 3 bosses or multiple bosses the Turian door.
It's a good name. It's concise.
Once you get past the Turian door, though, I feel like it felt very Castlevania to me the first time I played it. Honestly, if I were to play it anew today, now that you can teleport between save points, which you couldn't when the game was launched, it might not have given me that feeling. Part of the reason why it gave me that feeling is because you have to spend so much time wandering, because there isn't as good a fast travel in the base game.
How key gated is the recently released game we don't want to directly mention?
I would say that there are a lot of different colored doors.
There are a lot of differently colored doors, but they are opened by what would probably be considered abilities.
Yeah, I think that for the most part, it's mostly ability gated. The bigger problem is that it has it does what the Metroid Fusion did, where it blocks you out of places that you can backtrack to very often. Whereas that technically happened in Super Metroid, but you could kind of get around it. Especially if you know the secret movement techniques.
Yeah.
Which
There's also a difference between like dropping you down a pit and like just locking the doors behind you. I feel a lot different.
I am finding out this new Nameless game has a lot of sequence breaks, though. The speedrunning community is very much having fun discovering. So
That's nice.
it may be deceptively linear when it.
I think there's a certain point in the game where it's just like, okay, you're allowed to sequence break now.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then before that, like whenever you try, it doesn't tell you when that happens. And whenever you try to do it before, it's just like, no, there's some random rubble here.
Also depends. Like, are you like doing a pause glitch to walk through a wall? Like that's a lot different from learning to wall jump.
So that's what I was about to say. Is most of the sequence breaks that they've been discovered are intentional, but there are a couple of glitch-based ones that will probably be patched because the company, the Nameless company that made this Nameless game, has a history of doing that recently.
Yeah. There's always going to be glitch-based ones.
Yeah.
If those are the only ones.
Yeah, apparently Ori 1 can be played backwards. You can do the bosses in reverse order, which is neat. But it's definitely
the way you do that is you have to like go to the reverse gravity area and then like you reverse gravity as you're teleporting to a different save point, and then you fly upwards, and then you can access an area you couldn't normally access, and then you can go backwards from there.
Yeah. I think it's neat that you can do that, whether or not it's intentional. Honestly, unintentional things are as much a part of a game as intentional things. So,
Yes.
Like the Superland dev actually had a post in the subreddit this week where they were asking about what people like in sequence breaks.
Yeah. Oh, was that the Superland dev?
Yeah,
Man,
there was
everything.
actually a pretty good discussion between them and the Bon Appetit dev, where like they were talking about the things that they had to like test and the like discoveries they made with sequence breaking in their game.
I think the Bon Appetit dev is a master of sequence breaking design, to be honest, but. Or at least I think that Bon Appetit itself is a masterfully executed game when it comes to that.
Yeah, it is one of those games that's pretty open and letting you go to various places whenever you want.
Yeah, I'll maintain it's underrated, although, the combat can be a huge turnoff for a lot of people. Like Aslan, Tears of the Earth, my game of the year and the 5 out of 5 that I've most recently given is the bigger detractors of it is because the combat isn't up to snuff. Which I think the combat is fine, but
Yeah,
I grew up with games with much worse combat, so it's just.
Yeah, I think my big problem with Bon Appetit is the boss design was like, basically you had to cheese every boss.
Yeah.
Like if you tried to legitimately fight them, you just get wrecked.
Yeah.
But then there was a way to cheese all of them.
Honestly, I find that appealing. That's because there is no AI that I will not exploit. So anyway,
Astalon is still also my game of the Metroidvania of the year.
Yeah, even after playing Nameless Game. Yeah. Anyway, I probably should sign off before I start naming Nameless Game.
If you want to make an announcement before we sign off.
Oh yeah, we should probably talk about that. So after a lot of reflection, I don't think I can continue doing these streams, but I wanted to encourage Cauldrath and Master to continue doing them. But that's definitely going to have to be on a different Twitch channel going forward. So last week will be my final Our Metroidvania podcast stream with Master and Cauldrath. And they'll be carrying the torch forward.
Yes. Also, we have just recently reached a year of doing this podcast. So it is fitting time to change up the lineup.
So season 2 is still coming, but Professor Q will not be there.
He was killed off.
He was killed off. Yeah, you guys need to kill me next week.
Or no, we're just recasting you. We're going to call the new person Professor Q.
No. If it's should be like whatever the first letter of their name is, like Professor A or whatever. So there will always be a professor. Or Master could just change his name to Professor M. But yeah, it's definitely not happy news, but it's something I just need to make some changes in my life. So that is why.
Yep, completely understandable.
So thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.